I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. Today is the final day of Banned Book Week, which is an event very close to my heart. And every year I try and read as many banned books as I can, starting in September, because 1 week just isn't enough for me to read more than one book, or even one whole book usually. So I've been reading banned books since the 1st of September. That makes it sound like I'm going to now present you with a massive stack. I'm not. I've only read a couple because, like I said, not a fast reader. Why am I focusing on that? Let's get on to what I read. First up, A Clockwork Orange. This book has been frequently banned and challenged for offensive language, violence, and sexual violence. When I was looking into this book and why it is frequently banned and challenged, one specific violent scene kept coming up. It was quoted in literally every website that I looked at, and is what people mention if you ask them about the book. And that's where the main character and his friends break into someone's home and then they force a man to watch as they rape his wife. Obviously massive trigger warnings, which I should have said at the beginning. Whoops, I'll put them across the screen, it'll be fine. So I read that scene mentally prepared for it to be really harrowing. No, it's short, and what very limited description there is more of the husband's reaction to watching the gang rape of his wife than anything to do with the victim herself. There are additional violent scenes where they corner a man and beat him and tear up the books he's carrying. Now that and the scene where they break into the couple's house both become important for the plot later on, where towards the end of the book the main character encounters both of those victims and, you know, consequences. There's a third violent act though, which is not plot relevant. It doesn't come up in any way, the main character doesn't think about it, it doesn't seem to contribute to the sort of the character's personal arc, and it can't contribute to the general characterization of the character, because it's the third of those three violent acts. We already know what kind of person he is when it happens, so it's kind of a superfluous violent act. That act of violence is when he lures 2 10-year-old girls to his home, gives them alcohol, and then educates them. He describes himself as being a real beast. He describes them screaming, hitting him, trying to fight him off, and when it ends he specifies that they have to put their clothes back on and are crying and talking about how he should be arrested. Of the 3 big violent scenes that happen at the beginning of the book, it's the longest, it has the most detail of the act itself and the trauma of the victims. But then it's also the least relevant to the plot. If that scene was completely cut, this book would not change in any way. I thought it's kind of interesting that the fact that children are sexually assaulted in this book is not what it's known for. The scene where the man is forced to watch his wife be raped is what the book is known for, and that is logical in that it's the scene which becomes most important for the plot later on when the character re-encounters the man. But it's not the harrowing content, and I thought it's surprising, or not really surprising at all, more disappointing, that in my research for reading this I never came across any trigger warnings relating to the assault of children. I never saw that scene being discussed as some of the difficult or challenging or inappropriate content. And what I also found interesting was that this is not the first book where I have been blindsided by pedophilia. And I think it's interesting, disappointing, and not surprising to see the people who are challenging books and demanding they be banned are more concerned about, oh no, a man has to witness his wife being hurt, the poor guy, than they are about the wife is hurt or, oh my god, those poor children. So that was kind of my frustrating, I guess, experience of reading this. I didn't find the book particularly harrowing, but I was surprised that those couple of paragraphs where the children are attacked had not come up in my research. I'm going to keep repeating myself if I don't move on though. Aside from some general disappointment in the nature of the discourse about this book, I thought the book is actually fine. Assuming that, you know, you read it with awareness that is going to have some triggering content, it's kind of interesting. I thought the use of a fictitious slang language was, again, interesting. I keep using the word interesting whenever I review a book. It's quite a problem. What I find kind of interesting about it from a writing perspective is that it creates additional challenge for the writer and of course for the reader, because you don't get definitions of any of the slang terms, you kind of learn what they are through repeated use and context. So that kind of created an unusual reading experience that took me probably a full chapter to kind of get into the swing of. But it's a really short book, so even though it took a little bit of extra effort to kind of understand, it was actually a really quick read. I think I did this in 2 days or so. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's fun and enjoyable, but I don't know. Is that why we read a classic anyway? The next book I read was The Scarlet Letter. I knew a little bit about this book just because it's so commonly referenced in pop culture, but I did a little bit of reading to see why it's frequently banned and challenged, and the reasons I found were sexual grounds, immorality, and pornographic and obscene content. So I went into this expecting sexy times. There are none. Oh, the disappointment. Because of pop culture references, I knew that this was a story about a woman who commits adultery with the local minister and has to wear a Scarlet Letter A on her dress going forward, and that she's ostracised by the community and that she endures that punishment with quiet dignity. But that was kind of all I really knew. That was still enough though to kind of lead to a bit of disappointment, and I think it's because that description makes it sound like it's a book about a woman being ostracised from her community. Kinda isn't. It's really a story about the minister being racked with guilt and going completely overboard with his processing of his guilt, ultimately resulting in his death. Those are two very, very different things. I was expecting to read a story about a woman processing the experience of being completely ostracized. I was expecting a story of her being separated from her community and maybe finding some kind of freedom in being ostracized. But no, we see nothing. She just becomes like extra good. From the perspective of a modern reader or maybe a writer, I thought that this book felt like it was kind of peppered with missed opportunities. Not necessarily because the story that's told is bad for the time, but the woman's husband shows up and he befriends the minister, and you get all these kind of, oh, he's evil suggestions that maybe he's poisoning the minister kind of moments. The minister and the woman decide that they're going to run away together and they are booking passage on a ship, and then the husband shows up and he's going to be on the ship as well, and you're like, oh no, and nothing comes of it. You get a lot of descriptions of the child who is conceived through this affair. There's a lot of moments where she seems to be otherworldly in some way, and again, I think if this book was written today it would turn out that she was like a changeling child or something, because there's all these little hints that she's otherly in some way, but it all comes to nothing. And I think as just a general read, from a modern perspective and without any kind of academic scaffolding to encourage me to think certain things, I just found it a generally sort of lackluster book. There were so many things that could have gone down really exciting paths if it was written today, that I just kept noticing them and getting distracted and disappointed when they kept to kind of more old school storytelling with a moral kind of paths. I don't know if I'm being particularly coherent. When it comes to the charges of pornographic and obscene content, that's a completely ridiculous accusation for this book. There's nothing. There isn't even a passionate kiss. There's nothing. Oh, the disappointment if you're in it for that. As to the immorality grounds, from a modern perspective, no. Yes, the main character has committed adultery by sleeping with the minister. But she left England and came to this American community sans husband. We don't know why. We don't know how long he's been missing, but when he shows up, she's very surprised. It reads as if she would have been quite rightly assuming she was a widow, actually. It doesn't tell you anything that makes you think her husband was just around the corner or she slipped away from her husband to have that affair. He was gone. So that's a bit kind of strong of an accusation, I guess. And then, yes, out of wedlock with the minister. Okay, I guess that's technically immoral. But the whole point of the book is this guy being completely racked with guilt and suffering and dying because he did a bad thing. I would have thought that this book is more reinforcing that you shouldn't do the naughty things. I don't know, maybe I missed the point. Maybe we're not even allowed to acknowledge that bad things happen. Is that the issue? I don't know. The third book I was going to read was Catch-22, which is frequently challenged for racial slurs, offensive language and military style misogyny. I've been working on this for 3 weeks and I have read like that much of it. I don't know, man. I suspect that the racial slurs and the misogyny are gonna really stop me getting into it. It may also be that after reading 2 previous books with such a male focus, where there was sort of underutilized female characters or female experiences, maybe this just wasn't the right book for me to try next. Maybe I should have gone on to Madame Bovary. But anyway, this was my attempt and it failed. So that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you're new around here, maybe consider hitting subscribe and ringing that bell so you can stay up to date, and I'll see you next time. Bye!